Well, hello my card making friends. Thanks for joining me once again. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card for my son's birthday. I wanted something that was masculine because he's, 22 years old now, but still showed my creativity and that I, am thinking about him as I make this card. So the vision I had was that this card would be basically a mirror image on the front and the back. And so what I'm creating right now on this cardstock is the sun. So let me tell you, I started out cutting up a piece of watercolor paper because I had all kinds of visions for using different mediums on this, kind of like a mixed media type of project. But when I got into it, and after I put these inks on it, I totally went a different direction. And this is often what happens when I'm creating, as I'm sure it is with all of you. So, learning from having made this card, I would advise you, if you were to make something similar, to use an 80-pound Nina Solar White and just go ahead and cut it in half, making it 4 1/4 by 11 inches. And then when you do the fold in the middle, you would have a regular A2 size card, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. No need to use watercolor paper for this particular card as I made it. So what I'm doing now is just using a blending tool with the foam blending um, uh, tips on it. They have Velcro on one end, and you just put on the blending tool and use a different one for each color. And I made the sun, and I put some using fossilized amber, and then I put some spiced marmalade in the middle for more of a intense sun kind of a look. And then for the sky, I'm using broken china. Now, the thing about these dioxide inks, these are a new product from Ranger in the Tim Holtz line, and they are a combination of pigment ink and dye ink. So they have properties of each. They spread very nicely, but when they dry, they do get that chalky kind of a look, but it's not a chalk ink, so don't think that. And the nice thing is just like with the distress inks, once they're water activated, so once you get water on them, they'll spot up. Now, as you see here, what I found using these inks, and this is the first time I used these, I don't know if it was the oil for my hands, because it didn't look like I had a yellow ink on my fingers, but you can see definitely a fingerprint there at the one edge um, where I was holding the paper. And so I started using a paper towel to hold the um, the base as I was blending the ink on it. That was a little, I'm sure it's just my inexperience. This is the first time I've used these, but that was a little troubling. I thought, what the heck, why am I getting these fingerprints on here? And it didn't even, like I said, didn't look like I had yellow on my fingers, but perhaps I did. So I just kept working with it. I wasn't going to start all over. I mean, one thing with making cards, I have found that if you make a mistake, you just try to work it into the overall design, or put an embellishment or something over it. Don't start over, because oftentimes those mistakes turn out to be the best part of your piece of art. So I continue just building up my layers on here. I got a little bit of sticky, I used some, at first I had a piece of tape on there. It was to hold it down, and anyway, when I was moving it around and working on it, I didn't get all the tape off, so that's what that was. I know it doesn't look like much here, but again, I had something in my mind and I was working towards that vision. So I wanted to have the appearance of some greenery behind where I was going to put my uh, focal point, which was the grasses and the wheat and the dandelion and all that kind of a stuff. So this is the cracked pistachio color, And again, I just wanted an overall appearance of greenery there because my focal point grasses and so forth are going to be silhouetted supposedly by the sun. That's kind of the look, I was going for. So I just kept building up the colors and blending it in um, and working with it that way. The one thing when you're using these inks or regular distress inks is you want to start off of the edge of the card and then blend into the card so you don't have any hard lines. I will say that these Distress Oxide inks are a little bit more forgiving in that regard than the regular Distress inks. But still, you want to start off the edge of the paper and then blend in. And you just keep adding and blending until you get it the darkness that you want. Now, one thing I did find with this card is because I start off the edge, of course I get some of the ink on the craft mat, and of course that ink got on the underside of the card. So if you wanted this to be a one layer card, you would have to be very careful about that and not get the ink on the underside of your card, which is one of the reasons why I used a piece of blue cardstock under this to cover that up. Now here you see me misting with just regular water in a misting bottle that I have, and I love that spotted look that you get with the Distress inks and with these oxide inks. They have that same quality where they're reactive to water. Now you could blot it here and get the really spotted look, or with these oxide inks, that's the whole thing. If you leave the water as they are, and I'm kind of speeding up the process with my heat tool, you get that oxide look, because as I said, these kind of get a little bit chalky looking, just like rust. So that's the quality of these inks. Now here you're going to see it was really wet, so I blotted it a little bit. So those actually have like spots in the ink as opposed to that oxide look. So you can get really creative with these oxide inks and do all kinds of different things with them. And here I wanted to show you, if your paper kind of buckles, just use the heat tool on the underside of it and straighten it out. I do that regularly with cards, and don't have too much trouble with buckling. As long as it's completely dry before you adhere it to something, you should be pretty set and not have a problem. So these are the stamps that I want to use on this particular card. They're from Inka Dinka Doo, and this particular stamp set is Meadow. And my original plan was to use the grasses along the bottom, and then I really wanted to use the dandelion, but I ended up not using the dandelion at all. And I didn't use these grasses because they didn't cover the entire bottom of the card. And I didn't want it to look like I was repeating the pattern. So I had another stamp set by Creativity Essentials that had a wider grass base, and so I ended up going with this one instead. And it was quite a bit larger than my card, so I just inked up a good, I don't know, 2/3 of it with archival black ink. And here I'm just kind of marking where I want the end of the black ink to stop, so that I didn't, over ink it and get it all over my craft mat. And because it's a large stamp, I just laid my card on top of it and then put a piece of just regular cardstock on top in order to be able to rub it and get a good impression of the ink on top of it. And then I just turned my base around, and I'm doing the exact same thing on the other side. Because remember, I wanted this to look like a mirrored image. And believe me, I was kind of holding my breath here. I didn't want to mess up the card sliding it around on that stamp or something. But it really turned out well, and at this point, up to this point, I wasn't sure I was going to like this, but like I said, you just keep plugging along, and who knows, your mistakes might turn out to be the best part of your piece of art or your card or your art project. So here, these look like little pieces of wheat to me, and so I am putting it on here. And again, I'm using the black because I wanted it to look silhouetted for my son. He's quite, you know, manly, masculine, and so, you know, nothing real feminine or too artsy I think would go over well with him. So I thought these grasses and weeds, and again, I wanted to use the dandelion because I had photographed him blowing a dandelion when he was, gosh, about 5 years old, and I still have that photo up in my house. It's one of my favorites, but it turned out to be too big for this particular card, so I ended up not using it. You'll see that in a little bit, but anyway, I was really liking how these wheat grasses were looking so far on this card, and the whole silhouetted look. It was exactly what I was wanting in that part. The underlayer with all the oxide inks, I had envisioned doing all kinds of different things, like a mixed media. I had pulled out different stencils that after I got those oxide inks on, I was going to lay the stencils down and kind of rub across it with a baby wipe and get, you know, a whole different background look. But then I was just thinking it was going to be too much, too busy. So here you see the dandelion that I wanted to use, and it was just way too big. The stamp set had these, I don't know what they're called, but it had this other stamp. I thought, well, I'll try these out, and I fiddled around with it quite a bit, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I really wanted to use that dandelion, but it just wasn't working out. So ultimately I decided to go with a smaller stamp, inked it up, figured out where I wanted to place it, and again, I'm still kind of second guessing, and so I stamped it on a piece of scrap paper just to see what it would look like. Hard to imagine, so I went ahead and put it on, and sure enough, as soon as I got it on, I didn't really like how it looked. So that ended up being the back side of my card, and so it turned out to not be an exact mirror image, but I mean, it wasn't bad. It just I don't know, it wasn't what I had envisioned in my mind, and so I decided to do the other side slightly different. So you'll see here that I didn't use those at all. Whatever those things are called, they're thorny little looking things. So on the front, I decided to use the butterfly and kind of just keep it simple, because I was going to be putting the sentiment, you know, the happy birthday sentiment on the front. And then as I was putting this set away, I realized it had a dragonfly, and I thought, oh, this card really needs a dragonfly, because it kind of symbolizes me. I have a tattoo of both a butterfly and a dragonfly, and so I kind of wanted this, you know, just to kind of represent this card, you know, coming from his mom. So, you know, the thing about doing card making or any kind of art, I'm sure all of you do this as well, but you're thinking about that person when you're making your piece of art, and so a lot of love goes into it. So I scored at 5.5 inches and then folded it in half for an A2 size card. And now you're kind of seeing where it's almost a mirror image, except I had those, you know, that one stamp on the back side that I didn't put on the front. And this is where I realized, oh, I got ink on the underside of my card base. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to have to use some blue cardstock, the same size, and make it the inside of my card. So here's where I'm kind of working through that in my mind, and I had to cut down my top card, the one with the design on it, just a little bit, to get them exactly the same size. But once I got that worked out, I put my score tape on the card. Now, this was, I've never done this particular kind of a card before, so definitely a learning experience. I put my score tape on, and I, ended up putting the blue underside on, but I did have a problem with it opening and folding correctly, so I'll point that out to you in a little bit. Now here I wanted the card, the blue base, to work with the design itself, and so I used a stitch. These are from Dynamics. They're my favorite things, Dynamics, and they're stitched borders. I stitched basic edges is what they are, and so I'm kind of like in this now that you could see the blue of the undercard on the top of the design. So this stamp set right here is a banner, and I wanted to put a happy birthday on this banner. So I decided I was going to just stamp the banner with clear watermark ink, and then I was going to use white opaque embossing powder and heat it with my heat tool, so that I would have just a happy birthday banner. Very simple, not overpowering the simple design of the card. Now I don't remember where I got this particular white, opaque white. When I'm done using that, the next time I purchase some, I think I'm going to get a finer grain than the one I have, because with fine, small words, these grains are just a little bit too big, and I don't get that crisp wording that I would like. But it works fine. I mean, I'm not going to throw away the white opaque embossing powder that I have now. I'm going to use it up. But just learning from experience that next time I'm going to get a finer powder for my my embossing. I don't do a whole lot of embossing, but every time I do, it's really fun to see it melt with the heat tool, and the properties of it just look so different. I like how embossing looks on the cards. So here I'm trying to decide, do I want to keep the whole banner with the fishtails on each end on the card, or do I want to offset it a little bit? And ultimately I decide that offsetting it a little bit is going to look better. And I think I did mention that I actually embossed that on vellum. It's 40-pound vellum that I bought from Simon Says Stamp. I'm sure you can get it from Amazon and other places. So now I decided I want to use my dandelion. So the inside of the card turned out to be the perfect place to use that dandelion. So I pulled out my Hero Arts white opaque ink and placed the blue base in my Misty, because I wanted to make sure that if I didn't get good coverage with the ink, that I could put it in again. And because the stamp itself was going to run off, I used the new tools, Misty Creative Corners, that came out recently, so that the card could overlap the card base, and but I would still know that my card isn't moving around, and if I had to reapply the ink on the stamp, that it would work out fine. So here I'm playing around. Do I want black ink? Do I want white ink? Etc. But ultimately I decide to stick with the white ink and go with that. because, you know, it's a dandelion. It should, at least I think it's a dandelion. I really don't know, but that's how I envisioned it. And I wanted something subtle on the inside of the card, because if you have to, you know, write over it or whatever, it's no big deal. And at this point, I decided that was the right opacity, but I wanted just the tips of the dandelion part to be a little bit brighter white. I could have come in with a gel pen later, but I just put a little bit more ink on those tips, and that worked out perfect for me. And I'm getting ready to put the sentiment on the card, and I didn't want the, you know, that was a pigment ink that I used for the dandelion, which takes a little bit longer to dry. So I just hit it with my heat tool to make sure that it was completely dry before I put my acetate on top for my perfect placement of my sentiment. I wanted to make sure that they were straight, so I needed the guidelines from the piece of acetate. And I tilted it up there just to, you know, give it an eyeball one more time and make sure that it was straight. And I'm using my black archival ink here again. I just wanted to get a nice, actually I don't think I used the black archival. I probably used my Memento black ink. I like the Memento black ink usually for my sentiments because it gives me a nice really dark black crisp image for my sentiments. So I was pretty pleased with that. I thought it turned out well, but you know, this is where I was telling you I kind of goofed up a little bit. So I took off the protective things from my score tape, and I laid down the base. So far, so good. And then I laid down the other, but what I found out was that it didn't. After I adhered the top part of the blue cardstock to the design piece or the design layer, then I couldn't open up the card all the way. Oh shucks, you know, that didn't work out right. I mean, it looked good, but I couldn't open it up all the way. So I ended up fussing with that a little bit later, and I should have just left it alone. In hindsight, I should have just left it alone, but too late for that now, because what I ended up doing was kind of taking an X-Acto knife and just slicing that blue cardstock so that it would allow the entire card to open up flat, you know, to be able to write on it. But then I didn't like how that looked, so I wouldn't do that again. So I'm just using multi-matte medium on the back of my vellum here to put my sentiment on the front of my card. And I have found that the multi-matte medium does not show through on vellum, so you don't have to worry about it looking bad or whatever showing through. I think it works perfectly. And I just put one of my blocks on top of it to hold it down while it was drying. It adheres very, very quickly. And then here I was trying to decide, it needs a little bit of something, but not too much, right? Because it's for a man. And so I played around with a couple of things. Ultimately, I decided to keep it pretty simple. I'm not sure if I showed it in this video, but one thing I did end up doing later is I used my Wink of Stella gold glitter, which is extremely subtle on the butterfly and just the wings of the dragonfly. So at this point I thought, oh, it needs a little something just to finish it off, and I ended up using my corner chomper, I think is what it's called. At first I did the 1/4 inch, and then I decided it needed the 1/2 inch. So with the 1/2 inch I was much more pleased with it. And of course I'm still trying to decide if I need to put like some pearls on that dandelion or whatever, but ultimately I just decided to stop because it could, I could easily overpower it. Sometimes I think that's where I mess up the most, is I just keep going. But you can see I kept fiddling with it and trying to decide, like, it needs something. And even at this point, I'm not sure if I should have kept going. Here you can see where I cut the blue cardstock so that it would open up flat in order to write on it. But then I didn't like that white line. Of course, it would be the same thing had I cut 2 pieces of cardstock and put on there. It would have been exactly the same thing, but I don't know. It was okay, but I think I learned a little bit from it. This is the final result. It came out okay. I liked the design. I certainly liked the silhouetted um, grasses and stuff on the front of it. So it came out okay, but I think I would do a couple of things a little bit different next time. So that's it for me, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video and hearing my struggles designing a card from scratch. And with that, I wish you a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you, and take care.